It is the first day of July, 552, and the sun has not yet cleared the Apennine ridge when the killing begins. On a low plateau in central Italy, somewhere between the old road stations the Romans called Tagine and a field that would be remembered as the Busta Gallorum, two armies stand a bowshot apart in the grey light. One of them is going to stop existing before noon. On the wings of the Roman line, 8,000 men have planted their feet in the dirt and notched their first arrows. They are cavalrymen who have been ordered to fight on foot today, which they do not like, and they are arranged in two long, curving horns that reach forward like the arms of a crescent. Between those arms is open ground. Into that open ground, when the trumpets go, the finest heavy cavalry left in the Western Mediterranean is about to ride at a walk, then a trot, then a full gallop, straight down a corridor that has been built to kill horses. By the time the light is full, the corridor will have done its work. Procopius of Caesarea, who served on the staff of these same armies and is the closest thing this battle has to an eyewitness, gives the dead on the losing side as 6,000. Other counts run higher. The number that matters more is one. One king, even now riding out alone between the lines in gold-plated armor to dance his horse before the armies, the man who for a decade had not lost a single open battle against the Roman Empire, would be carried off this plateau dying and stripped of a gold-spangled cloak that would be folded into a saddlebag and sent across the sea to Constantinople as proof. This is the story of how the most successful barbarian king of his generation was destroyed by a man who had never been a soldier in his life. The man who beat him was somewhere past 70. He had spent almost his whole career inside a palace, counting money and managing the private apartments of an emperor. He was a eunuch, which in the 6th century Roman world meant he could never command the kind of automatic respect a scarred general's body commanded, and he knew it. His name was Narses, and Italy was the second empire he would save. We will come to the first. I want to be careful here, because the temptation with a story like this is to make the old courtier into a secret genius who saw it all coming. Procopius does not quite say that. What Procopius says, if you read the Gothic War slowly, is stranger and more human. That Narses won partly by patience, partly by money, partly by refusing to be hurried, and partly because his opponent, with the trap already shut around him, chose to put on a show. There was, on the morning of the battle, a single rider. He came out from the Gothic line in full armor, gold catching the early sun, and he began to perform. Procopius calls it a war dance. The man wheeled his horse, tossed his spear high, and caught it as it spun, threw it from hand to hand, made the whole exhibition of a champion, daring anyone to face him. It was the oldest kind of theatre, the duel before the battle, and it was also, though almost no one watching could have known it yet, a man burning daylight. Hold that rider in your mind. He matters more than he looks. The Goths who lined up that morning were not a horde. That is the first thing the chronicles get across, and the thing modern audiences usually have backwards. By 552, the Ostrogoths in Italy were the heirs of Theodoric, who 2 generations earlier had ruled the peninsula better than any emperor had ruled it in living memory, who kept the Senate, kept the grain dole, kept the aqueducts running, and was buried under a dome of solid Istrian stone outside Ravenna that still stands. Their king now was younger, sharper, and far more dangerous in the field than Theodoric had been. He had taken back almost everything the empire had spent 15 years and a fortune to conquer. His name on the chronicles is Totila. On his own coins he stamped a different name, Baduila, and the gap between the two names is the first small warning that we are looking at this man almost entirely through the eyes of the people he was beating. To understand how a 70-something eunuch came to be standing on a plateau in the Apennines at dawn, watching a golden rider stall for time, You have to go back 20 years, to the moment a different emperor in Constantinople decided that Italy was Roman and always had been, and that he was going to take it back whatever it cost. It cost more than anyone imagined. It cost the country itself. There is a line in Procopius, written about the countryside of Italy in these years, that I read several times before I let myself believe he meant it plainly. He describes people in the hills around Picenum dying of hunger, their colour gone livid, their skin drawn tight and dry as leather, eating what could not be eaten until they simply stopped. He puts the dead in that one region at 50,000. He was not a man given to sentiment. When Procopius reaches for a number like that, it is worth slowing down. This was the war that Justinian started, and to be fair to him, he did not start it to make farmers eat grass. He started it because he had a vision, and the vision was clean and total. The Roman Empire had once gone all the way around the Mediterranean, and it would do so again. North Africa had fallen back into imperial hands in a single brilliant campaign. Italy, the old heart, the city that gave the empire its name, was next. In 535, the armies went west, and at first it looked like the African miracle repeating itself. The general who carried that early war was Belisarius, and he was everything Narses was not. He was young. He was a soldier's soldier. He was beautiful in the way the chroniclers liked their heroes beautiful. And he won. He took Sicily almost without a fight. He took Naples by sending men up through an abandoned aqueduct, a detail Procopius clearly relished. In 536, he walked into Rome, and the Goths who had held it walked out, and for a moment the whole project seemed nearly done. It was not nearly done. The Goths had a king named Vitiges, and Vitiges came back to Rome the next year with an army the sources put at more than 100,000, and laid siege to Belisarius inside the walls he had just taken. The siege ran for a year and 9 days. They fought along the Aurelian walls and in the tombs outside them and around the great mausoleum of Hadrian, where the defenders, out of missiles, are said to have torn the bronze statues from the monument and dropped them onto the men climbing the ladders. Belisarius held. Eventually he did more than hold. He tricked the Gothic nobles into offering him their crown, marched into Ravenna, and shipped Vitiges back to Constantinople in chains. By 540, the war looked won a second time. And here is where the story turns, and where a man we have not properly met yet first walks into Italy. Justinian, suspicious of Belisarius, the way emperors are always suspicious of generals who become more famous than they are, had already once sent out a second man to watch the first. That man was Narses. He was, by this point, already old, already a fixture of the palace. He had come up not through the army, but through the most intimate machinery of the imperial household, the cubiculum, the private apartments, where the eunuchs of the bedchamber controlled who reached the emperor and who did not. He had risen to be one of the men closest to the treasury, the man who knew where the money was, and he had already once saved Justinian's throne in a single afternoon. That was the first time, and it had nothing to do with Italy. In January 532, the two great factions of the Constantinople hippodrome, the Blues and the Greens, who normally hated each other across the racetrack, united in a riot that nearly burned the city down and very nearly ended the reign. The mob had a candidate emperor, and they had Justinian penned in the palace, ready to flee. It was Narses who went out, carrying gold, into the most dangerous crowd in the empire, and moved quietly among the leaders of the Blues, reminding them whose man the emperor really was, and pressing coins into the right hands. The Blues left the hippodrome. The Greens were left trapped inside it, and the soldiers did the rest, and the chroniclers count the dead in that sealed arena at 30,000. Narses had not lifted a sword. He had understood exactly who could be bought and for how much, and that, it turns out, is also a way to win. But in 538, sent to Italy to share command with Belisarius, that same instinct nearly cost the war. The two men did not work well together. The army split its loyalties. A city called Mediolanum, the modern Milan, was under Gothic siege and begging for relief, and while the two Roman commands argued over who answered to whom, the relief did not come in time. The Goths took Milan and, by Procopius's account, levelled it and killed the male population, a number he gives as 300,000, which is surely too high, but which tells you the scale of the disaster as contemporaries felt it. Justinian recalled Narses. The lesson was filed away, and it was a lesson about command as much as about war. An army cannot be run by a committee of proud men. For a few years after 540, with Belisarius gone east to fight the Persians, Italy was supposed to be a conquered province, quietly settling down. Instead, it produced Totila. He came almost from nowhere, a young Gothic noble raised to the kingship by men who had nothing left to lose. And he did the one thing none of his predecessors had managed. He made the war pay for the Goths instead of the Romans. He freed slaves and enrolled them. He took the great estates and turned their rents toward his soldiers. Where the imperial tax collectors had squeezed the Italian provincials, Totila told them, in effect, that he would squeeze them less, and many of them believed him, and some of them were right. He was, by the testimony even of his enemies, scrupulous with prisoners, and careful not to let his men plunder the countryside that fed him. Procopius, who had no reason to flatter him, records the king restraining his own troops and judging a rape case in a captured town with a severity that shamed the Romans. I find that detail more persuasive than any battle, because it is exactly the kind of thing a hostile source includes only because everyone knew it was true. And he won. He won at Faenza, he won at Mucellum. He peeled the cities back one by one, and in December 546, after a long siege, he took Rome itself. The garrison had been starved past the point of fighting. Men had thrown themselves from the walls. Totila let his soldiers into the city, but again held them back from the worst. And then he did something that frightened Constantinople more than any massacre would have. He decided to make a point about whether Rome should exist at all. He began tearing down sections of the city's walls, drove out the population, and for a stretch of 40 days, the ancient sources insist, the city of Rome stood completely empty. No senator, no priest, no beggar. The most famous city in the world, a field of silent stone. It did not stay empty, and the war ground on, and Belisarius came back to Italy a second time with too few men and too little money, and could do almost nothing, and was recalled again. By 550, Justinian had to face a hard fact. The Reconquest he had been paying for since 535 was being lost, city by city, to a man half the age of his best generals. He needed someone he trusted completely, someone with the authority to spend without asking, and someone who would not turn the command into a contest of pride. He chose the old eunuch. Narses agreed, but on a condition that tells you he had learned the lesson of Milan exactly. He would not go without an army that was actually paid and actually his. Justinian, frightened enough now, gave it to him. The treasury opened. Narses gathered something the empire had not put into Italy in years, a real field army, tens of thousands strong, paid in advance and reinforced with allies he hired with the same coin that had once emptied the hippodrome. There were Lombards, who would matter terribly later. There were Herulds, fierce and unreliable. There were Persian deserters and Huns. And there was a great deal of gold, because Narses, whatever else he was, had spent his whole life knowing that loyalty has a price, and that an unpaid soldier is just an armed man waiting to leave. In the spring of 552, he brought that army down the long curve of the Adriatic coast into Italy from the northeast, the one direction Totila had not fully sealed. He moved slowly. He moved with maddening care. and somewhere south of Ravenna, on the high spine of the Apennines, he turned inland onto a plateau between two old way stations, where the road ran through open ground broken by a single low hill, and he stopped, and he waited for the king who had never lost to come and find him. The first move was made in the dark, and it was made over a hill the size of a large barn. Between the two camps, out on the open plateau, there was a single low rise, and whoever held it would overlook the ground where the armies would meet. It was small enough that it could be taken by a few hundred men, and large enough that it would decide where the fighting started. Totila understood this perfectly. So did Narses. The difference was that Narses did not wait for daylight to settle it. In the last hours of the night, he sent a picked body of 50 infantrymen forward to seize the rise and hold it, and they got there first, and they dug in along a sunken track that ran across its face. When the Goths came for it at first light, 50 men held the lane against repeated charges, and held it, and the small hill stayed Roman. Procopius lingers on this because the men who watched the war knew it was the whole battle in miniature. The Goths could not even take a barn-sized hill from 50 men. It should have told Totila something. It did not. If the period interests you, this exact kind of thing, the small decision before dawn that quietly decides everything that comes after, then this is the work this channel does, and there is a great deal more of it. Now back to the plateau, where the sun is coming up. Narses had drawn his line in a shape the Goths had not seen used against them before. The centre was infantry, dismounted, a solid wall of men on foot, and standing among them, on foot as well, were the Lombards and the Heralds and the other allied horsemen whom Narses did not trust to stay in their saddles and stay in their place. He had taken them off their horses on purpose. A man on foot in the middle of a line cannot decide to ride away. And on each wing, curving forward, were the archers, 4,000 to a side by the usual reading of the text, until the whole Roman front was a shallow crescent with its points reaching toward the enemy and its archers looking down the length of any charge that came up the middle. Totila knew the trap was there. This is the part that has puzzled people ever since, and it is where the chroniclers and the soldiers disagree. He had men still coming, a force under his commander Teius on the road behind, and the sensible thing, the thing a cautious man does when the ground favours the enemy, is to wait. So he stalled. He sent word he wanted to parley, and he sent out the golden rider. That rider, the one I asked you to keep in mind, was Totila himself, or a champion in the king's own gilded armour, depending on which reading you take. He rode out into the open space between the armies in armour overlaid with gold, a purple banner streaming, and he performed. He put his horse through its paces, wheeled and curveted, threw his spear up into the air and caught it as it came down spinning, tossed it from his right hand to his left and back, leaned far out over the horse's neck and recovered. It was a display of skill meant to fill the empty hours of the morning until Teius arrived, and it was magnificent, and it was useless. The whole Roman army stood and watched a man dance, and the man was dancing because his reinforcements were late. When the dancing stopped, the reinforcements still had not come, and Totila ran out of ways to wait. The Goths, hungry to close before the day was lost, did the thing the crescent had been built to make them do. The king ordered the charge, and he ordered it, the sources say, with lances only, no missiles, no bows, a charge of pure shock cavalry meant to break the Roman centre by sheer weight in a single rush. There is an argument that this order was the fatal mistake, that by forbidding his own archers to answer the Roman archers, he handed away the one thing that might have kept the wings honest. There is a counter-argument that with the trap already shut, no order would have saved him. Either way, the Gothic horse rolled forward across the open ground, gathered speed, and rode straight into the throat of the crescent. The archers on the wings did not have to aim, they only had to keep shooting. The Goths, charging up the middle, took arrows from the left and arrows from the right,